Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Welcome again to the Empowering Neurologist. I am very excited about our program today. I'm going to have the opportunity to interview Dr. Tim Noakes. Dr. Noakes is a South African physician who many of you may be familiar with. Back in 2015, he apparently made a Twitter recommendation to a woman to consider reducing the carbohydrate and increasing the fat in her infant's diet. That caught the attention of a registered dietitian who filed a complaint, and then Dr. Noakes was involved in hearings over the next several years with really a threat to his ability to practice. He ultimately prevailed. Spoiler alert. We're going to hear all about that. But, you know, in researching Dr. Noakes for our program today, I learned quite a bit about him that I think you're going to find fascinating. Let me first tell you about his bio. He studied at the University of Cape Town, obtaining an MB-CHB degree as well as an MD degree and a DSc degree in exercise science. In 1995, he was co-founder of the now prestigious Sports Science Institute of South Africa. In 2008, he was honored by the President of South Africa for his, quote, excellent contribution in the field of sports and the science of physical exercise. Professor Noakes has published more than 750 scientific books and articles. He has won numerous awards over the years and made himself available on many editorial boards as well. He's authored many books. We all know about his book, The Lore of Running, which really many consider to be the Bible as it relates to so many of the important considerations that runners need to understand. It's now in its 4th edition. Since 2011, he's written his autobiography, Challenging Beliefs, Memoir of a Career, which I think is going to be an interesting story to be augmented by his more recent experiences. He's also written Waterlogged, The Serious Problem of Overhydration in Endurance Sports, published in 2012, published The Real Meal Revolution 2013, and followed that with a book focused on what we should be doing with children called Raising Superheroes. Recently, he has co-authored a book called The Lore of Nutrition, which then focuses on his prosecution experience, ultimately to his vindication, if I may. Following the publication of his best-selling book, The Real Meal Revolution, he founded the Noakes Foundation, the focus of which is to raise funding to support high-quality research of the eating plan that is described in his book. And as you may expect, that is an eating plan that focuses on reducing refined carbohydrates and welcoming healthful fat back to the table. Dr. Noakes, or Professor Noakes, now devotes a majority of his time to promoting this low-carbohydrate, higher-fat diet, especially in relation to individuals with insulin resistance, as well as on raising funds for research through his foundation. He's highly acclaimed in his field, and at age 69 is still quite physically active, taking part in races up to 21 kilometers. So I'm really excited to jump right into our interview, so here we go.
Good.
Hello, Professor Noakes. How are you doing today?
David, it's wonderful to be in touch with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat and to learn more about you and your story as much as my own story.
Well,
I must just begin.
I'm amazed by this technology that you and I are having this talk, and we're recording it, and you're in South Africa, and it's free. I mean, I still don't get it all, but nonetheless. In the introduction, I talked about you and your work and your focus on low carbohydrate, and then what went on with you with the HPCSA in South Africa, and it's a very, very compelling story. So let me start by just asking you, how did your interest in low carbohydrate, higher fat diet, how did that get started?
Well, it started out basically because I received an email one Saturday morning And the email said lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks without hunger. And it was from the new Atkins for the New You book by Eric Westman and Finney and Volek. And I was so angry when I read that, when I saw the advert, I said, how could these people sell out to Atkins? So I rushed down and bought the book. And after about 2 hours reading, I said, oh my gosh, I got it completely wrong. I realized then that for 33 years, I'd been promoting this high carbohydrate diet without the evidence. And I saw there was 150 studies of which I knew nothing. And here I meant to be an expert on nutrition and sport and so on. And I knew nothing about that. So at lunchtime on that day, I chose, that's it, no more carbs. And within weeks, my health started to improve dramatically. I lost substantial amounts of weight. My running improved back 20 years. It went back from being a 60-year-old to a 40-year-old. And I could not believe it. And so that's what started me. And then eventually I realized, because South Africans knew I'd promoted this high carbohydrate diet, that someone would pick up that I'd changed. And of course the media did. And then the issues became that I was promoting this dangerous low carb diet without any evidence and so on. And that then invited the problems that I subsequently had.
Well, we all had those epiphany moments. And,
Yeah.
We were all schooled by peer-reviewed journals that lowering dietary fat would be the way to prevent coronary artery disease and other issues. And, the characterizations of Atkins' diet, were really threatening and harmful. And at least from a historical perspective, though, they're probably more in tune with what we've eaten for an awful long time in comparison to this bizarre diet. You characterized the higher carbohydrate diet as genocide, I think was your words. Noakes has characterized mainstream dietary advice as genocide. Pretty strong words, but I think that you, more than probably anybody in the world, had to defend that situation, that contention rather. So I want to take us back to February of 2014 when a registered dietitian complained to the Health Professions Council of South Africa because you tweeted something to a mother giving her advice in terms of weaning her infant. Can you walk us through why you did that, how that happened, and then the fallout that occurred?
Sure. So she tweeted, and she wanted information because what had happened is her husband had gone on the Banting diet. And she had started feeding herself and her husband the Banting diet, but now she was breastfeeding. Sorry, we don't know that this is the case because she never appeared before the tribunal. So we actually know nothing about what she actually did. But piecing it together, it seems like she was breastfeeding at the moment, and she wanted to know whether it was safe for her child to continue breastfeeding because she was eating cauliflower, and she wondered if the cauliflower was causing problems for the baby. And so, but the key point is she asked we. She didn't say me. She didn't say I've got a baby. She didn't say I'm breastfeeding my child. She said for breastfeeding moms and babies. So that makes it a we question. And the ruling in South Africa, as I'm sure it is anywhere else in the world, if it's a we question, she's asking for information, not for medical advice. So there was no doctor-patient relationship. And I just responded and I said a few things. And then I said, the ideal is to wean onto a low-carb, high-fat diet. And that was the problem. Let
me stop right there. That is exactly what breast milk is it not?
Exactly. Precisely.
So what you were telling her to do, or telling people to do in general, was really pretty much emulate what breastfeeding does by continuing higher levels of fat. I mean, there's a lot of fat in breast milk, 50% of which is saturated fat, I might add. But you were basically telling her to continue, at least from a macronutrient perspective, what the baby was already receiving.
That's correct. And the guidelines for the South Africans are exactly that. Because we have in South Africa a problem that children are weaned onto cereals, and that causes a major problem. And it says in the guidelines, feed as often as possible, meat, fish, dairy, eggs. That's as often as possible. And that's what the guidelines are. And the lady who drew up the guidelines was the one who gave the expert witness against me. Can you believe it? And I must just tell you, you appeared in the trial. You may not know this. I don't know if you do know it.
I don't.
So the two expert witnesses came from the same university and the same department. And her understudy started giving evidence against the low-carb diet, and Dr. Perlmutter's book came up. And she said, Grain Brain is a disgrace. You must not read this book. You must not listen to Dr. Perlmutter because he just writes books to make money. And that is on the record.
It's certainly not the first and not the last time that I've been attacked for doing what you do, and that is, sharing what our beliefs are. And you, as I recall, the images of you in the courtroom, just flanked by stacks and stacks of research papers, and you had your laptop and you were quoting one after another. I mean, it's often been said, don't let science get in the way of a good emotional decision.
Yeah.
So here you went before this tribunal, and that word tribunal, at least, has a connotation of something from the Game of Thrones. But nonetheless, you go before the tribunal, and ultimately you are fully exonerated, aren't you?
That's correct. So you're quite correct. We gave 12 days of testimony, which was, on my case, about 6,000 pages of scientific research. The prosecution, on their hand, came up with one paper, which we subsequently showed was erroneous for various reasons. But they had one paper. And I suddenly realized that they're actually not interested in the facts. But fortunately, my expert legal team said, listen, we're going to destroy them with facts. I just want you to overwhelm them with facts. And we went away from just being babies and said it's so. Fortunately, the chief person on the judging system who was running the trial, she said, no, Dr. Noakes has been, children eat a diet, adults eat the diet. It doesn't matter. We're not just focusing on child's health. We're going total health. And that allowed us to speak for 12 days. I spoke for 9 days, and including 3.5 days of cross-examination. And then 3 expert witnesses, Nina Teicholdt, who you know very well, Zoe Harcom, who you'll also know well from Wales, and Karen Zinn, who's a South African dietitian working in New Zealand. They spoke for another 3 days. So we had 12 days of testimony, and not one of our facts was contested, not one. When Nina finished, the chief lawyer for the prosecution just asked her, how long are you staying in Cape Town? Because I hope you have a lovely stay here. He didn't ask her one question. He couldn't cross-examine her on one fact. So anyway, in the end, there were 13 decisions. Well, there was a first stage, and then there were 10 decisions. I won all of them. Then they appealed the case, and we won another 3 rulings. So we won 13 of 13.
So who appealed it? The HPSCA?
Yeah, that's correct. They appealed it, and
why would they appeal or even contest you in the first place? What was it that you were describing that is so threatening that they would not only begin this tribunal but then appeal it? What threatened them so much?
Okay, it had nothing to do with the tweet, nothing at all. What happened was I wrote a book called The Real Meal Revolution. In fact, I didn't write it. I just wrote the science, and then there was a whole beautiful recipes. And I then became the problem because this book changed completely people's opinions of nutrition in South Africa, completely. So for a period of 2 or 3 years, the only topic that anyone spoke about at a dinner table was the Banting, this low carbohydrate diet. It literally stormed across the country. And people obviously reported they'd got much healthier and they'd lost weight and reversed their diabetes. And this became a message. And then all of a sudden, the dietitians were faced with a problem because people said, but I went on Noakes' diet, high-fat diet, and I didn't get fat, and I didn't have a heart attack, and I reversed my diabetes. So what are you telling me? How can you continue to justify the diet that you prescribe? And they didn't have an answer. So the answer was to take me out. That was it. And the lady who laid the charge against me, her head professor at some stage of her career, served on the HPCSA board. She was the dietitian represented on the board. The two of them spoke. And the girl who laid the claim said, we have to do something with Noakes. And then the story came back, oh, well, the Health Professional Council, we've got something. We know what we're going to do with Noakes. This came back before the trial began. And we were able to find that information because through the rules that you could get emails, we were able to collect those emails. And there it showed clearly that the whole thing was set up to shut me up completely. And the goal was to make sure that we didn't attack the low-fat diet because we were being so effective. And that was fundamentally what the story was all about.
It was recently appeared on a national program here a couple months ago, talking about a new book that I've written, of course, to make money. And it was actually a revision, the 5-year anniversary of Grain Brain.
Which I've got your book and I'm working through it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
The woman who was interviewing me actually just featured as Time Magazine's top 100 influential people on the planet. She said, well, Dr. Perlmutter has a new book out. It's all about lower carbohydrate diet. But we reached out to the sugar industry, and they told us that sugar is good for us in moderation, as decades of research would support. That's how I was introduced. So, it's these are inconvenient truths. I mean, who wouldn't like to eat sugar and processed carbs all day long? Why not? I mean, we're attracted to that kind of stuff, but we have to make more sophisticated decisions about our diet and our health in general based upon what we know. And now that we recognize this incredible fraud that was perpetrated globally by industry, influencing medical publications in the late 60s, and how that filtered down to you and me as practicing healthcare providers, and how we bought into it. We drank, as they say, drank the Kool-Aid with plenty of sugar in that. So it is, I just commend you for holding the line and standing up and defending your beliefs. And, you also bring up a very interesting point, is that your beliefs changed quite radically. I'd say 180 degrees.
Yeah.
And I myself have been accused of changing my narrative over time. But the point is we're called upon to be dynamic in our recommendations based upon what we know from current science. So the fact that you changed your narrative at one point after having this revelation is a good thing. And I'm sure people challenged or continue to challenge you based upon what you've previously said. I want to go back to, if we could, just the press that you've gotten, and subsequent to this experience, you were featured in a movie, a documentary called The Magic Pill, which really did actually feature some clips. Pete Evans produced this movie and was in the movie as well, documentary, and had clips, and which I thought was just a really wonderful demonstration of you standing up and winning the case, etc. But, the commentary online about both the movie, The Magic Pill, which is available here on Netflix and Amazon, and about you in particular continues, and it's still very scathing. I was looking at, in preparation to talk to you today, Dr. Michael Gannon, president of the Australian Medical Association, states that this idea that dietary manipulation can change the course of autism spectrum disorder or change the course of a cancer patient is just ludicrous. It's hurtful to people who are affected by these diseases and are worried about themselves and their loved ones. Saying that, why should we pay any attention to any advice, no matter what your ideology is, with reference to autism or cancer, because obviously they have no bearing. We have to wait for medications for autism and certainly chemotherapy and radiation for cancer, when the reality is that nutritional interventions for both of these entities, as was demonstrated in The Magic Pill, as adjuncts to mainstream treatment, are indeed quite effective. So how do you respond to that kind of broad net that is thrown, that diet doesn't matter?
Yeah, it's very frustrating because being on Twitter like you are, we just every day someone tells us of their magical transformations. I met a lady today. She lives in New York, but she lives in Singapore. She was a Singaporean. And she showed me a picture of a person with peripheral vascular disease so severe that this person was going to have to lose their leg. That was on the verge. She had this huge wound which wouldn't heal. The person converted, and she was told that as soon as that goes to the bone, we're cutting your leg off. She goes on a low-carb diet and cures the ulcer and saves her leg. Now, we can't explain that. There's no way that we can explain that. So what are we going to do? In South Africa, we have 2,500 amputations every year in one particular state. And that we didn't used to have that number of amputations. Must we now tell all of those people, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you? When you see this evidence, these anecdotes coming through, and that's, I built my career, as I'm sure you have, on observations on patients which conflicted with the standard opinions of what we should be doing. The most famous was the water intoxication story, where athletes were collapsing and they were all told, well, of course, you're dehydrated, you must drink more. And we proved that it was the opposite. They were over drinking. But that began with a single paradox. A single lady phoned me and told me what had happened. And I examined it and worked it out, and there was the obvious solution. So anecdotes are critically important. So I get very frustrated. But I'll tell you, I'm going to, because you're a neuroscientist, I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay, good.
Which has appealed to me recently. How do you get into medical school if you don't have a memory that you've got a huge memory bank? Okay? And many people are eidetic. So they have a photographic memory. Now, my challenge to you is, if you have a photographic memory, are you ever be able to be creative? Can you be creative and have a photographic memory at the same time? Because my opinion, having worked with some of our senior professors, including the man who converted me to this diet, they all had this photographic memory. And they were not creative. If you look at their careers in science, they were not good. But these were the cleverest people, supposedly the cleverest people I ever met. And they were brilliant lecturers and brilliant writers. But they didn't have the creative spark to make a real difference in science. And I think it's because if you can just look at something and know it immediately, you never have to work it out. My career and your careers, I'm sure, are based on, we wanted to work out, well, how does this thing work? Because if we understand how it works, then we don't have to memorize it. We'll always know it. And I just wonder if these people can't do that, because it's so easy for them. They've just got this memory. And then they're, of course, the stars on the grand rounds, because they read the Lancet that morning. They just paged through the Lancet. And then they come up and say, oh, but the Lancet this morning, you see, it's got this serum rhubarb predicts Alzheimer's disease in 25 patients, blah, blah, blah. And they can give the whole story. Where the rest of us, we'd have to study it at great length to know have all that information.
I think the differences between being clever or smart versus having wisdom. So wisdom is the ability then to tap into other engrams in your brain and bring them to bear in terms of problem solving and creativity moving forward. And it is a bit of a prefrontal cortex type of activity. We all have varying degrees. I think that this ability to have eidetic memory often I've seen is a bit reminiscent of what we might see in varying degrees of being on the autistic spectrum. There is real dedication to expansion of one intellectual function at the cost, but in conjunction with other less functional aptitudes, socialization, creativity, and we all have varying degrees of that. So, it's always very on the one hand, you're always in awe of these individuals who can create the literature or quote the literature the way that they do, but then you see that their ability to leverage the various things that they read into something new, which is creativity, is often significant compliment, and they become entrenched in one doctrine, and as such, they are least likely to embrace change and more likely to dig their heels in and defend the past. Maurice Maeterlinck wrote a very interesting quote that was emblazoned on the office door of a friend of mine, Dr. Amar Bose, who made headphones and all sorts of high fidelity equipment. And it says, at every crossroads on the road that leads to the future, each progressive spirit is confronted by 1,000 men dedicated to defending the past. And, there are people who really do their very best to explore where we are, but any sense of challenging the status quo is extremely threatening. You've been through it. I've been through it. And it's okay. We take a deep breath, because we know that the only way we can make progress and advance is by challenging the status quo by definition. So you've done that your whole life. I want to segue, if that is appropriate, to other cool things about you.
Thank you.
And I was very taken by your research and exploration with swimmers in extremely cold water in the Arctic and I think in the Antarctic. Uh,
That's correct.
let's talk about why you got interested in that, and then if you could explain what your findings were.
So Lewis Pugh, I first met when he was 19, and he reported that there was a report in our university, because he was a University of Cape Town student, that this guy had swum a particular distance and he'd almost drowned when he came to the beach because the surf was so huge that he'd almost drowned. And I was a surfer, and I would not have gone anywhere near that beach on that particular day. The surf was so frightening. So I realized this guy was unusual. So that's in my background, in my mind. At the age of early 30s, he phones me and he says, can I swim around the Cape Peninsula? So it's about 100 kilometers. We're not going to do it in a single swim, but it's pretty treacherous, and it's cold, and there are sharks, and there are all sorts of other things. But it's warm enough to not be a challenge. And I've done enough ocean swimming, and I'd help people swim the English Channel. And I knew it was completely safe for him if he did it in short sections. So, which he did. And when he finished, he said, I couldn't have done it without you. And I said, but Lewis, I did nothing. I just said it was possible. He said, that was the key. You believed in me. And it was your belief that there was a moment when I wanted to quit. And I said, one person believes in me, I'm going to do it. Because he'd asked all the other swimmers in the Western Cape, the long distance swimmers, could he do it? They all said, no, it's impossible. So anyway, he swam it. And then he went and swam the length of the longest fjord in Norway. And then he came to me and he said, fine, listen, I've done this swim. Now, can I swim at close towards the North Pole, the furthest north? And so we went to the island of Svalbard. And he asked me, could he swim off Svalbard? So I said, what's the temperature? He said, from 0 to 5 degrees centigrade. So I said, well, I'm not sure that you'll survive, because there was no data. There was no data in the physiological literature. So we set up some experiments in Cape Town where we had him swimming in a pool where we cooled the temperature down to about 3 degrees centigrade, gradually from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5. And we got him to swim for 20 minutes in there, and his temperature dropped, but it didn't drop enough to cause us concern, and he didn't lose consciousness. So we were pretty sure that he'd be fine. And in fact, he got better every time. And what really changed was he was able to raise his temperature before he went into the water. So initially, when he got in the water, his temperature was 37, that's our units. But by the time we had trained him, it was up to 38.5. And so that 1.5 degrees centigrade was critical, because that's how much his temperature would fall in the 20 minutes that he was in the water. So when he came out of the water, his temperature was usually normal. It was about 36.5 to 37. It would then drop substantially, but he was warm enough when he came out that it was safe. So he swam up the furthest south, then furthest north, and then we went to Antarctica, and we swam off the peninsula, the Antarctic Peninsula. That was frightening. It was 0 degrees, the water, and it was black water, and we swam at midnight, and it started snowing in the middle of the swim. It was really epic. And then after that, we went to the North Pole. And so you get on the boat at Murmansk, and you go up on this Russian icebreaker. It takes you 7 days to get to the North Pole. And then they secure the boat against the ice. So it's amazing, because the ice is moving. They're so skilled. They managed to anchor, as it were, the boat against the ice so that it's moving, but you're on the boat in the ice. So we found a place where there's 250 meters of water, because he wanted to prove that there was open ice at the North Pole in height of summer as a marker of global warming. So we found this 250 meters, and he had to swim 4 times. And that was the most frightening day of my life. It was 18 minutes of pure hell, because although I was fairly confident, it was the only time he swam at minus 1.8 degrees. And the other problem was that the water depth is 4 kilometers. So if anything went wrong, we couldn't save him. Whereas in the Antarctic, he'd swum in water which only 1 or 2 meters deep, because it's a continent. That's just ice. And if he had a problem, I would have come back to Cape Town, end of my career, because I'd killed the swimmer. Anyway, he finished the swim. Then more recently, last year, he swam the length of the English Channel, but from east to west. Sorry, from west to east. which was 500 kilometers. And the consequence of that, which was amazing, was on the 70th anniversary of the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, he was the sole speaker in Westminster Abbey in London. He gave the speech. And he spoke, and he began with his talk about his swim at the North Pole and his anxiety.
Was he wearing a wetsuit or a dry
No,
suit?
no, just a Speedo, just his little costume. That was the key. He had goggles, hat, and a Speedo. That was the key. A wetsuit's quite easy to swim at that temperature. Yeah.
So you discovered something called anticipatory thermogenesis, whereby this fellow, knowing what was coming up, would generate thermogenesis, generate body heat, would raise his body temperature to counteract the cold. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was astonishing. And in fact, at the North Pole, when we were in the cold and we were just preparing, he was actually sweating. I mean, can you believe that? The temperature was 0 degrees, at least the outside temperature, and he was sweating. Okay, now that's, if you see that, you realize there's something very strange happening here.
So that's this one individual. Do you think that we all have some degree of anticipatory thermogenesis?
I think it's much more prevalent than we think. Yeah. His key was that, okay, that helped enormously. I must tell you that we measured his muscle temperature. He then, when we were down south, he did swim for 1 mile at 3 degrees centigrade. And when he came out, his temperature it dropped to about 33, which is quite cold because it got 37 to 33. But his muscle temperature was even lower, and it stayed for 2 hours post-swim. We put him in a hot water shower. The muscle temperature didn't rise. So he was just a block of ice. He reheated the core, but his muscles remained a block of ice. That shows you how he was just a block of ice when he came out of the water.
Any other findings in his blood work that were interesting?
No, that was the main thing. But I think the point was that it was all in his head. That's what made him different. He'd been trained in the special services in Britain, and he said that training had very much helped him. And in fact, he's the only guy who ever got through he failed twice to become a special SAS paratrooper or whatever it is. And only on the third time did he get through. And he got through because he'd worked out, instead of running around a massive lake, he'd worked out he could swim across the lake with his kit and not get it wet, not get his gun wet and so on. But he had to work that out. And then he made the time within a few minutes. So it was always his brains. But anyway, the point was that he had this unbelievable control to dive into that water at minus 1.8 degrees centigrade and to think that there's a possibility you're going to die. That's what he had to overcome. And that's what he spoke about in Westminster Abbey.
Tell us about your book, The Lore of Nutrition.
So the Lore of Nutrition is what we wrote about, the whole story of what happened to me, because it begins in 2012. That's when my cardiology colleagues at the University of Cape Town start writing letters to the Cape Times, calling me a cholesterol denialist and a statin denialist and so on. And what happened was, because they weren't censored, because the university didn't say this is not how you conduct behavior as an academic, that was open season. And as a consequence of that, every major organization in South Africa that had anything to do with hearts or diabetes attacked me. And the problem for them was that I kept everything. So everything that was written or reported on the internet, I printed out. So when I came to the trial, this had been going on for 3 or 4 years. And I had 3 or 4 years of documentary evidence about what they'd said about me. And of course, all of it was unscientific. They had no science behind it. So during the trial, whilst I was preparing all the other evidence, I said, well, to save myself, just to keep me busy, I must write up the story of what happened to me before that. And so I did, and I wrote it initially in sequence of time. And then when the people looked at the book, I said, no, you must rewrite this according to topics. So when we broke it up into topics. So that was the lead up to the trial. And then I was so fortunate that there's one really good journalist in South Africa who was a vegetarian when she started, and she thought I was mad. And she came to a low-carb conference that we organized, and she was convinced I was wrong. And she heard 18 of the world's authorities talking on low carbs in Cape Town, including all the great names from all over the world. And she said, Tim, I think you're right. And so then she switched her diet to low carbs. And halfway through the trial, I realized we had to write a book about it. And I asked her, because she came to every day, the 28 days we were in court, she was there tweeting. Amazing. I mean, she would tweet every comment that was made. I've never seen anyone with that capacity, because she could tweet and then she's still listening to the argument that's going ahead. And she would tweet that. I did. Astonishing. Anyway, so she wrote all about the trial, and then I included 2 chapters on the science behind what we had presented. And we put the book together, and it's done extremely well in South Africa, and it's going to be released in the United States and the United Kingdom, in fact, in about 2 weeks' time, under a different title called Real Food on Trial.
Real Food on Trial. So there'll be a graphic right on the bottom of the screen right now that'll show that, because that's probably about when this will air. So that's terrific. We will absolutely look forward to seeing that. Well, you're a heck of a guy, and I'm just so delighted that I get to virtually spend some time with you like this. And what's the future look like for you? What are you going to do?
You know, that's a great question, because I'm now pushing 70 in a few weeks' time. And I've got more to do now than I've ever had. I've got a whole bunch of books I need to write. And I have a foundation that is promoting this dietary advice for doctors. We realize that doctors are critical, because if we can, conversion of one doctor, 10,000 patients might be converted. So we have a thing called the Nutrition Network, run by my foundation, the Noakes Foundation. And we're working really hard to produce CME certified information, teaching doctors how you prescribe this diet. And it's going extremely well. It's been well accepted around the world. Most of the doctors on the course, 60% are from the United States. On the courses are from the United States. So that's going extremely well. My passion is a thing called the Eat Better South Africa campaign. We've shown from 10 interventions in poor communities in Cape Town that if you get people off sugar and you get them off the carbs, their health dramatically improves, because the poorest people are eating the worst foods. And we've shown that on $3 a day, you can eat well. And now that's, of course, that's in South Africa in these communities. And focusing on the cheapest foods, which are really healthy, like eggs and sardines and offal and liver. And they can get, because we're next to the sea, they can get quite good sea as food, as fishes as well. So we're working really hard, because I know that the patients tell us, I've stopped taking my hypertensive drugs. And that's the key to me. I think we can show that within 3 weeks of this diet, you can reverse so-called essential hypertension. So that's one of the folks. We're having a randomized controlled trial beginning quite soon, in which we are encouraging these people to eat the particular diet, the diets that we prescribe, and we're going to watch their health, and their health improves dramatically. And they tell us, you know, doc, I no longer have to go to the hospital every week and collect my party pack. And that party pack is just full of the medicines from the rest of the world that are supposedly helping control. And it's amazing. And one of the best moments I had was a lady came up and she embraced me and she said, Dr. Noakes, you gave me hope. My whole family historically has had diabetes, and I didn't want to be tested because I know what happens. You lose your legs, you have strokes, etc., you get kidney failure. But you've given us hope that if we just change our diet, that doesn't have to be the way we go. So that's the other thing. And then I'm continuing to write lots of books. And the book I'm focusing on at the moment is a diet of lies. It's the lies that we've been taught about our diet. Because even though I've written in Law of Nutrition, we've written lots of the science, it's still too intangible for many people. It's too complex. And you've got to say, right, saturated fat does not cause heart disease, and here's the evidence. Here are the gems of the studies that disprove it. So please don't come and tell me that there's no evidence that fat is not harmful. And so I've got about 15 topics like that, and say, here is the gold standard evidence. And what I want the book is a person can pick it up, and within 2 hours they can say, oh my gosh, now I understand why he says these are lies.
Well, I wish you all the best. I'm again very grateful to spend time with you, and I'll let you know when we're in the area, and if there's anything I can do to help, I'd be delighted. You know that.
No, thank you. I do know that, and it's been my privilege to speak to you. I've admired you for so many years,
Great.
And your work.
Thank you so much. It makes me feel good. All right.
No, you have a global presence, as you obviously know, but I just want to say that you were one of the people who inspired me as well.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. Thanks, David.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
What an amazing story, and what an amazing individual. You talk about perseverance. I mean, here is a man who confronted the onslaught that was brought against him in a court of law, with research study after research study indicating that, in fact, what was accepted as the status quo in terms of diet, at least in South Africa, the dietary recommendations that people were making were absolutely unfounded and basically wrong, and how empowering it is that he was able to vindicate himself. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Thank you for joining us today on The Empowering Neurologist. We hope to have you back soon. Bye-bye.